Well, hello once again, and welcome to Fortuna Found Kite communities and blogs and tutorials. So, on this particular segment, I would like to do what I would call sewing 101. Lots and lots of videos and tutorials out there in the past about more advanced techniques in kite making and structural design and bridles and all that sort of stuff, but very little information for the beginner and someone just basically getting started in kite making. You know, there's great curiosity as to what type of sewing machines to use, what type of threads, and basically on how to use a sewing machine in general, unless, you know, you have the facility that your mother sews a lot or some family member sews a lot and can teach you how to do this. You're pretty much going to learn this on your own. And so I want to offer some tutorial and some suggestions, some of the things that have worked for me throughout the years. Certainly not the party line. I encourage you to attend other workshops and listen to other folks and see what type of machines they use and some of the techniques they use for their sewing and take it from there. So sewing machine is something it's kind of personal. It's like a piece of musical equipment. You know, you make it to fit you. And there's all kinds of great sewing machines up there. I know folks who sew on very simple Singer machines. Others sew on Berninas and other types of sewing machines. They all do something different. You know, you have to find something that works for you. For me personally, the FAF machine has been actually the go-to machine for me for many, many years, and I've owned many of them. I do not favor the fully computerized systems. You know, I don't use fancy stitches. I'm basically down to 2 basic stitches and maybe 1 decorative stitch every now and then. I consider stitching ground entertainment. It's not something that you will see at 200, 300 feet up in the air, obviously. So it's strictly a matter of taste, and I call it entertainment on the ground, to either amuse yourself or to amuse other folks with fancy stitches or decorative stitches and that sort of thing. Different colored threads. I basically either use black or I use white, depending on the work. And I have it down to a straight stitch in different sizes and zigzag stitches in different sizes. So it's very basic. The 1200 series sewing machines made by FAV, which are some of the older ones with the actual metal cases, are some of the best one. I happen to own 2 of them, and I use them as backup machines. I'm using a model 1536 here, which has a lot of features. It's not computerized. It's mechanical, fully mechanical. It's built on a plastic case, so it's a newer machine, but it operates very well, pretty much the same as all the others. The key of the FAF machine, not all of them, but the particular ones that we use for ripstop, have built in what they call a walking foot. And what that is, or dual feed, which means that every machine has a plate here that moves, these teeth that move back and forth. I'm going to remove the thread so I can go into the bobbin. If you can see that moving up and down, you can see the lower footing moving up and down. It's timed to the machine as the machine is spinning. Okay? This apparatus here is a walking foot. It's built into the cam of the machine. There it is up, so you can see what it looks like. And there's a set of teeth underneath there, the serrated teeth, right? Underneath that footing. So when you move this down and lock it in place, it works in time with the machine, so you have a dual feed situation. So what happens is that it's feeding, it's advancing your fabric both from the top and from the bottom. You have objects that are pushing on the fabric evenly forward. I've never done this, but I can say that with this dual feed system on a machine, I can take 3 yards, 2 pieces actually of 3 yards of material, and then cut another piece 3 yards and sew the 2 edges together. And when I get to the far end, I would bet that I wouldn't be more than 1/8 of an inch off or less of the 2 running together. So we would end up with this piece of fabric slightly ahead or slightly behind. That's how accurate this walking foot is. So we're not sewing on cotton. We're not sewing on apparel fabrics. We're sewing on fabric that's incredibly slick. These are hard-coated fabrics. Ripstop, coated ripstop. It's urethane coatings, and of course, the fabric comes in different weights. 1.5 ounces, half ounce, 3/4 ounce. This happens to be 3/4 ounce. It's the typical that most of us use. And from time to time, we use poly, the Icarex, so-called. That's even slicker. It's thinner and slicker. So by having the dual feed, we avoid a lot of puckering in the fabric. And the fabric is very slick, so we need something that'll push the fabric through the footings here in a smooth way. So that's what the dual feed does. Now, there is aftermarket walking foots out there, systems in the market. You can go to any fabric store and find what they call an aftermarket system that clamps to the back of the machine. But it's not timed to the machine, and that's the difference. So it's helpful, it works, but it does not work as well as something that's integrated already into the machine. So I live by this. This machine, to me, it's almost like religion. I've been using it for so long. But all machines have their little quirks. I strongly believe, these machines, they get into kind of a groove, depending on the thread that you pass through them. It's almost like a living thing. They get used to a certain thread. They get used to a certain usage, a certain tensioning that you use, both top and bottom. And I'll get to that in a minute here. I'll show you that. They get into a groove to your sewing, like an instrument or a piece of sports equipment. It starts to fit you and your technique, so to speak. And so the other thing that's interesting about the FAF machine, the moment something is wrong, it will let you know immediately by the sound of the needle. You'll hear a very, very ugly kind of crunch. So something is up in the bobbin. Something is just not quite right. Something is hung up. So it doesn't continue fouling up your work. You might get past maybe 1 or 2 stitches. You can cut the thread. You can rewind things. You can readjust the machine, go back to sewing, and sort of put the needle back in the holes that are empty now and begin your sewing again. Some of these machines have a bobbin light that lets you know your bobbin is running low, which is really handy, so you don't end up running out of bobbin right in the middle of a straight line or a curve. This particular machine doesn't. Some of the other machines that I've had do. Some of these machines also have auto thread. It's a lever that feeds a little hook that passes through the needle and grabs your thread, and when you release it, automatically threads. Most of them come with a cutter, so when you need to cut your thread, you bring the thread right to the back. I hardly ever use it because I have scissors right next to me, so there's the thread cutter right there, and it cuts the excess thread. The auto threader is really, really nice to thread your needle through, because I have to put my glasses on to be able to see to pass that thread through there. So each of these FAF machines have, different features. Some come with 2 or 3 great things: the bobbin light, the walking foot, the threader, and several other handy adjustments. Different bobbin threaders, some are more convenient than others. This particular machine, the 1536, it's pretty simple, to wind bobbins. And of course you want to have extra bobbins. You don't want to be winding individuals while you're in the middle of work, so you want to have a drawer full of spare bobbins that are already loaded with a bottom thread. So what's important, some people, look at my work and stuff and they said, how is it that it's so flat and clean and, tight and so forth? It's a combination of things, and it's my adamacy, really. Things don't have to be that way. It's really my preference. It's kind of a pet peeve. I love a tight sail, no wrinkles. I spend hours, what I call nip and tuck, It's just tensioning devices that pull on this corner, on that corner, all these fun little fiddle bits, to have the straightest, flattest possible skin that I can. And even though having absolute perfection is nearly impossible, I do my best to provide with as much device into the kite to take away all that stuff. But the most important part is really in your sewing, how to... We're really when we're stitching on fabric. Not only we're adding weight with the thread and with perimeter borders. You've seen a lot of my work has heavy black borders, sometimes half-inch, quarter-inch. In applique work, it's the same thing. Everything is surrounded by black borders, and it just keeps adding weight to the fabric and puckering. You're gathering. With your stitches, you're gathering the fabric. Each time you take a stitch, you're bringing the fabric in. So when you're finished with this elaborate piece of applique, the fabric is not always very flat, so sometimes it's difficult to join it to something. You have to stretch it and tape it, And then eventually when you put all your sparring on the kite and you stretch it, all those things get pulled out. But even with that, I hear many people complaining, even in spite of the frame and the tight sail, there's still a lot of pucker and a lot of wrinkling here and there. And I said, well, it's mostly really in your stitches, and that's tensioning. Which brings me to the next aspect of sewing on ripstop nylon, which I think is really, 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 really important, is the tensioning. Having a good balance between the tension on the top half of the machine and what's going on in the bottom. Okay? If you open up your case, you can see your bobbin here, and of course some machines have the bobbin facing up. You open up a case on the side, and the bobbin is sitting here on the side. This one is on the bottom here on the arm. So the FAF machine also, the elbows, the accessory elbow comes off the machine. So it opens up the space in here to be able to sew pillows or windsocks and things where you can actually pass the fabric under the arm here, and be able to sew around a narrow windsock of some sort, for instance. So that's another little, but a lot of machines have this feature. It's not unique to this machine. So the tension on the bobbin, once you load up a bobbin, what you want is this. You see, if the bobbin, with the weight of the bobbin, slides down on you, it's too loose. Okay? It's too loose. So, we want to adjust that little screw that's there accordingly. We tightened up clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on the tension that you want, until the until the bobbin no longer slides down to the table. Okay? That would be the proper tension for your bobbin. Up here on the machine, you also have a tensioning device right there, which will give the top, the needle tension, what's passing through the machine and coming through the needle. In the case here, I have it at number 4. There's been times when I'm sewing on heavier fabrics, I have to back it off a little bit. So it's a balance between this tension and this tension. So you have to experiment with that until when you see your work and you sew some stitches, whether they're straight or zigzag, let's demonstrate that. Okay, so let's bring the bobbin up. So we're going to use about a number 3 stitch, 0, 0. You know, here it gives you the size on these machines. It gives you the size, the spread. You know, what's beautiful, I mean, Pfaff is German, you know, technology. And German technology, I mean, their Pfaff machines to me are like a Mercedes-Benz, especially the older Mercedes. You open up the hood, and there you see little arrows pointing in this direction, that direction. The same thing on the dashboard of the car. It's like what you see is what you get, you know? Very directional, very self-explanatory. It doesn't require deep instructions, you know? So they, here on the machines, they post all the stitches. They tell you exactly left needle, right needle, center needle, you know, and where you need to be with the needle to create these different stitches. And so, and here on this lower level, it gives you the opening, how close the stitches are together or how open they are. So everything is really straightforward and simple. You know, there's other adjustments here. So let's run some stitches in here and see what we come up with, because there's something here that I want to demonstrate. So here's the standard zigzag stitch. For certain applique work, we'll use smaller, for some a little bit bigger. So what we want to make sure is that the knot of the stitch is inside of the fabric. Like in here, it's just slightly out. And I do that deliberately, so when I'm putting pieces together, I know which is the back and which is the front when I'm piecing material together by the feel of the stitches. But that doesn't mean you have to do that. So here I'm seeing a pretty smooth stitch. And what I mean by that is that the knot in the corners of that are pretty much inside of the fabric. Okay? There's no pulling. And most of all, you see smoothness. Okay? So if this is too tight, we're going to wind up with this knot here in the front and stretched out stitches. If this is too tight on the bottom, we're going to see that here. But one of the things that develops the most, it's a little bit of tunneling right here, right in here. When you look down those stitches, you're going to see kind of a little, you know, some tunneling happening there, you know. So what's happening is the stitches are grabbing the fabric and tunneling it this way. And that's creating a pucker, actually. So when you go join all your other pieces together, yeah, they're not going to square out. And so this is what you're looking for. This is the reason why you see flat work or clean work. And it's noticeable, you know, and it changes. Again, it changes. If I go to sew an Icarex, for instance, which is thinner and slicker, I have to adjust the tension of the machine. You know, so it's not universal. This is something that you're constantly, or not constantly, but at least a great deal of time adjusting to the thickness or adjusting. So I always, before I start on my actual work or project, so I don't ruin something or do something wrong with it, I test it out off the work here on the bench with the machine. So I've got many layers. I've got Dacron in there. I've got seam tape that's got glue. Let's see if the stitches get pulled back by me sewing through that glue or tape. those things affect your stitches. And so if you're doing a piece of work that does include seam tape, that's that double-sided sticky tape, I never have too much trouble. I can sew right through it and it has no effect, but it's got to do more with the tension. So I encourage each and every one of you spending as much time as you can learning that. Learn your machine and the tensioning devices, both on top and bottom. Try different stitches, straight stitches. Try your decorative stitches if you like using those, and see how it behaves at different tensions before you actually put all that to work in your actual project. So you don't end up ruining panels and then having to redo things. Back again, measure twice and cut once rule. Kind of the same thing applies here. Now, when you run out of bobbin, let's just say, and somehow you're halfway through that line, so what we do is we pick up where we left off. We just start the stitches here, we back off a couple, and then very slowly, or either by hand, we sew. Because what happens generally when you run out of bobbin, you don't realize that happened, and then you look and you see holes there and no thread. And so we want to cover those holes. We don't want to just go back and sew. We start where we left off, and we run a couple lock stitches, and then very slowly we try to put the needle right where it was before. Because chances are it's not very long distance. Where you missed, you might have a few inches of empty holes. So you need to go back and cover those, and then you can continue on. So if you have a machine that doesn't have a bobbin light, it's really useful that before you start any sewing, you check your bobbin to make sure. Okay, that is a guaranteed way of being able to start at one corner and actually finish at the next corner without running out of thread. Okay. So tensioning. The 3 T's: tension, tension, tension. To get flat work, unwrinkled, unpuckered work, you need to get your machine in a rhythm. You need to get, first of all, good thread. Now, let's talk about thread a little bit. Different machines, again, because sometimes I think they're living things, they get used to different threads and they like different threads. For instance, I've used everything from Gutermann threads to cotton threads to polyester threads. I've tried it all at one time or another. The best standard poly, it's Daybond 30. It's what it's called. And it's available from Goodwin's. It's available from Challenge. It's available pretty much everywhere. Fabric Sources, if you have accounts with some of the major fabric manufacturers, mills, they usually have the thread, and it's called Daybond 30. It's a 30 weight polyester. It's very clean. This thread is very, very clean. It's very strong. It puts up with a lot of tension without breaking, and it passes through your machine with minimal fuzz. And by that I mean Gutermann has an incredible selection of colors. Okay, if you like using multicolors, I use just black or white depending on the work. But what happens with cotton threads and other poly threads that are kind of fuzzy, where you look at them and you see a lot of fuzz in them, they start to accumulate. This, I just cleaned this machine, but you see this residue here and in here. It gets into the bobbin. So you have to blow that stuff out of there, and it gets into the mechanics of the machine, and it starts to clog up the machine as well. So you have to often, with a little air pump or whatever device that blows air, you have to blow the fuzz. The Daybond 30 is very, very minimal in residue. Very, very minimal. Residue is a good name actually for the fuzzy stuff. And so this is my favorite actually type of thread, and this is what seems to have passed in the long run after years of trying different things. What has passed the best through these FAF machines, and I've used many. I've burned about 2-3 machines that you can't get parts anymore through 35 years of sewing through them. So this is the newest one I've got. My 1200 models are stashed in the closet. metal cases, straightforward, what you see, what you get, dials, straight stitch, zigzag stitch. And let's face it, folks, really, that's all you need to sew a kite. You can't see these things. If you compete, only the judges appreciate, this great stitching and what have you, So the end result of product of my stuff is a combination of things. The thread, the tension on the machine, my setup, the way I work. I keep everything uniform. I keep doing everything the same way all the time. It's repetition, the 3 R's, repetition, repetition, repetition. So you develop a rhythm and a groove for doing things where things come out automatically the same way all the time. So consistency is what's going to gain these things, in the long run.
So we've covered quite a bit about the sewing machine. What I haven't covered yet, we spoke about thread, we spoke about settings on the machine, tension settings, and the different type of fabrics that we use and so forth and so on. Well, that requires also certain types of needles. I have a preference for the Schmitz, the standard Schmitz little packs that look like this that you can get from Joann Fabrics or any sewing, supply retail store. And typically for the type of work that we all do on ripstop nylon, we need size 12 needles, standard needles. 12 to 14 is the size. So depending on the thread that you use, you could run into a thing where a 12 is maybe too small and it doesn't pass the thread through the holes very well, thus putting a lot of tension on the thread. And we go back to what we talked about earlier, the puckering and that sort of thing. On the other hand, if you step up to a 14, maybe the holes are too big, so when you put your work to the light or at a distance and there's light coming through, you see the holes, and that's not exactly desirable either. So it's a matter of matching the needle to the size thread. In my case, using the Daybond 30, the size 12 needle works really, really, really well. I've used 14s also, but I've had to do some adjustments on the machine with the tensionings. So again, it's that balance that you have to attain, like we talked about, from top to bottom on the tension. The needle also comes into play right there, but not as much. So if it's a 12 or 14, it's probably going to do pretty well for you.
I don't know, pretty much everything else about sewing really is discovery. And once again, like I've done in a previous video, my information is obviously going to be available, email, messenger on Facebook. I'm pretty active on Facebook and be easily reached. Phone numbers will be available. So if you have any questions, I do want to engage with people either personally or by phone or by Messenger Live or by WhatsApp. I mean, there's a lot of apps out there for communication that we can use, and I have them all. And so, but the only thing that I don't use is Instagram, and I'm pretty sure somewhere along the way I'll sign up on Instagram. I know it's pretty good. Anyway, that's what these tutorials are going to be all about. This is another one. I'm sure I'm going to think of other things that I would consider 101 or beginning process that will be helpful to some of you getting started. But in the meantime, I bid you good luck and happiness in kite making. And just remember one thing. Don't quit. Keep doing what you're doing. Be persistent. Be consistent. And once you feel you have something to share with people, please share it here. Or flat out take someone in your area, local area, under your wing and teach them what you've learned so far, whether it's from me or anyone else of some of the amazing kite makers that we're going to have at Fortuna Found here in the very near future. So good luck and enjoy, and thank you very much for watching and listening.